Welcome to Capital Conversations. I'm Marty Owings. It's Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, and I'm pleased tonight to be joined by Representative Deb Kiel. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
That's correct,
yep,
yes.
From way up north in District 1B.
That's correct,
right?
Yep.
So you could only get better if you went 1A, right? Because 1A is that's the furthest most.
That's where you can see Canada.
That's right. Well, to borrow a Sarah Palin, well, you can see pretty good from 1B too, right? I mean, you're not too far, right?
You're absolutely right. I can see, actually on a clear night, I can see quite a bit. I can see the sugar beet plants on all three plants. It's pretty flat up there.
Yeah. Now, how far are you? Like, what kind of towns and cities are in your vicinity to give folks a rough idea?
My district is. I actually am born and raised in Crookston area, and then East Grand Forks is my largest city. I go through all of Polk County, and so I have Boston and Erskine and Mentor and McIntosh and Langby and Winger, and then I have all of Red Lake County. Okay. There are no lakes in Red Lake County, but there's a Red Lake River that runs toward East Grand Forks, meets in East Grand Forks, and there's Red Lake Falls and Plummer.
It's hard to find a county in Minnesota without a lake.
It is.
It's a bit strange, isn't it?
That is
Maybe
unusual.
that's the only county in Minnesota without one.
I'm not sure. I've never checked that out. And then I have Pennington County, except for Thief River Falls. So
Representative Kiel is in her. You were what, second term?
This is my second term. That's correct.
Elected in 2010 to the legislature. And we were talking before the show, you were in the majority at that time, came in with the Republican when they swept in and took over came to majority in the House and Senate. You were also, now find yourself in the minority, so things are a little different.
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, it's been a learning curve to the 4 years I've served. So.
Yeah. What's the most notable difference from being in the majority to being in the minority?
I don't know. I suppose some say it's the busyness, although I have felt that I'm busy either way. I suppose you don't see as many lobbyists. You don't pass as many bills. You don't. You're constantly watching for concerns in your district, and maybe that's true of both majority and minority. Sure.
Well, let's talk about it. There's a lot of things going up here on the going on right now up here because a lot of bills are being passed off the floor. Committee deadlines have passed, and now we're starting to see bills passed off the floor. By the way, just a reminder to viewers, we invite you to participate in our weekly political talk show. Just tweet us at mncapnews during the show, and we'll ask your question live on the air tonight. With lots going on, the events that went on in the Senate yesterday have gotten a lot of attention in the media, and I think just to let folks know, there was a vote on a tax bill in the Senate, and Democrats and a lot of political people were surprised when the vote failed. When they voted against, and it was a small margin, 2 votes or whatever, but I think it caught some Democrats by surprise, and then they quickly gathered together and retook the vote, and then it passed. So at first people thought, well, why didn't they have the Democrats lined up? You never take a vote on the floor without, knowing, like LBJ used to say, you keep the votes in your pocket, or you don't bring it to a vote on the floor. You Republicans did the same thing last time, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Difference this year may be some of the rural legislators from the DFL, from swing districts or metro area swing district votes.
Right.
They may not feel as emboldened to vote with the DFL on certain issues. Anyway, long story short, turns out they were in shock over this thing, and they say the Republicans had some shenanigans on the floor where they switched their vote at the last second, and when President Pappas had called for the roll call.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what have you heard? What went down as far as you know?
Well, I guess I would have been surprised if the Republicans who were voting yes at first were going to stay there, because people switch their votes, and but I think they were caught off guard, and I think it was difficult for the rural members to vote for some of these tax increases. It is difficult. It really affects our small businesses, and that's what we rely on in the rural area.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because on the House floor, it's they call you, the Senate always accuses you guys of being the raucous, gene-wearing, curse word throwing body, right? You guys are the more rambunctious body in
That's true.
in the legislature. And yet, in all my years up here, I've never seen that actually happen where people didn't respect the institution enough to cast a vote and not wait for the roll call and then at the last second hit that green button, turn it red so that that seems pretty Bush League. I think a lot of constituents would be upset about. What do you think?
It was a surprise. It isn't. I don't remember being encouraged to do that as a freshman either.
No, right.
I do know sometimes members don't vote right away, and I know that happened in the Senate with both parties, that they were kind of holding off votes and kind of got caught at the last minute and didn't realize that it was going to be shut down or whatever. And there's a lot going on the floor. And sometimes I can see where you might get caught, but of course it was a tax bill.
Yes, that's
so
right.
It was very important that you vote and vote the way you were planning to.
You're referring to one of the DFLers that hadn't quite voted yet, right?
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was my understanding, that they kind of got caught. And it happens. It just happened the other day on a vote that I had voted no on, and fortunately somebody turned to me and said, "Why didn't you vote?" And I said, "What are you talking about? I voted." It turned out the machine didn't work quite right and had registered me as not being there. So then we asked the House, Representative Thiessen, if he would reconsider, and the House agreed to reconsider, and we voted again. And I wasn't the only one. One of my colleagues had also been recorded different than she was, and I don't know if the board had problems or what. And of course, we looked to make sure that we were on the board after that. Boy, I tell you, we really watch. So.
Yeah, well, Speaker Thiessen being amenable to doing that, I think was a good thing, and the Speaker should do that, because that's ultimately you want the votes that you think people cast. I wouldn't count on that on a really, really contentious issue, but
no,
the Speaker might not backpedal and go, "Oh, that's okay, we'll let you." But equipment malfunction, be darned, we're going to take your, So let's talk about that a little bit. So you mentioned some of the provisions in the tax bill that was passed off the Senate floor that might be a concern to some citizens, like a tax on clothing. And when you're talking about a tax on people making $140,000 a year, a married couple, you're not talking about the ultra wealthy here, the $250,000, $500,000 a year. You're talking about middle class folks, right?
That's the concern. We all know that the DFL, their request was to go and tax the rich, and I believe that's
tax
even
even more than the governor?
More than, yes, right.
Right.
And but when you're talking about a couple that is making $140,000, you're talking about a small business that is trying to run a business, or two professionals. Yeah, right. Exactly. But more so when you mention the rural districts. That's a lot of our main street. A lot of what they put all that money back into their business. They're hoping to probably hire somebody so that they're not working. Some of those businesses are working 12, 18 hours a week or a day all the time, and it gets. I've done it on the field, but 2 weeks of running 17 to 20 hours in a field. Is hard work, but to do that year round is tough. And when you're dedicated to keeping your business going and making sure things are working, it is nice to be able to be successful enough to hire some help to relieve some of that pressure.
What are you hearing from constituents about the session in general and the DFL agenda, and I mean from folks in your district, because you don't just represent Republicans. No. There's Democrats who farm and Democrats who have those business. What are they saying to you? What are you hearing from all of your constituents, not just the ones who take your side on issues? Right.
I've just spent time on my surveys too, and what I was hearing was they're frustrated with regulation. The mandates that we put on our businesses makes it very hard for them to run a business.
What's some specifics that you can think of?
Requiring that, we talk about the minimum wage. That's a big issue coming up this week.
Yeah, we're going to spend a little time on that tonight.
Making that a mandate becomes very difficult for businesses who are hiring, especially young people, high school students that would like some experience.
Sure.
When we start telling them they have to pay more in minimum wage, one gentleman told me, he said, "That's what I rely on." Happened to be a Dairy Queen business, and he relies on. He's a year-round person. and relies on a lot of high school students. And he said, if you're going to make me pay more per student, I'm going to have to, or per employee, I'm going to have to hire less. And that was part of his frustration. We talked about, earlier you and I talked about the environment bill and the water increase fees.
Yeah.
Those will cost our businesses some dollars because they will have to pay that fee that will be higher, because it'll get passed down to them. If the community has to pay more, they will end up paying more.
Yeah.
There is a thing that we haven't talked about, a bill that we possibly will be talking about, a solar mandate, which would increase our cooperatives' electricity power, and that will be passed down. And so those are costs that mandates that are very bottom line costs to our employees or our employers. And so it's really difficult for them when they start to watch all their costs go up.
Sure.
And then on top of it, they may be making $140,000 a year, husband and wife. I can think of one I know personally that has a store in the main street. They both work long hours, and they're really struggling to be able to hire more people. And then we're telling them, oh, but you make too much money, we're going to tax you. And it's a real middle class issue. Not to mention, we're talking about taxing clothing. So that will, not only will it, I know some people feel that taxing clothing would be just fine, but on the border where I'm at, that's a draw from North Dakota for people to come into Minnesota to shop.
Sure.
It's a good advertising carry out. I heard it on the news today about the Mall of America. You know, that's one of their big advertising draws, is that you don't have to pay tax on clothing. And but that also happens in my rural area where they can advertise that. And
well, let me ask you about the point you made earlier about, you know, businesses saying, well, if you raise the minimum wage, I'm going to have to hire less. I have to have less staff. What about the alternative? Maybe pass that on to your, you know, customers or community by raising the prices of your goods, because I know that might make you less competitive in the short run. But if all of the companies are under one mandate, then how does that play out?
well, I know
I'm sure they're already thinking about that.
I got my ear bent good in March about this.
Sure.
The
yeah,
businesses
well,
said, I
can't.
can't.
If I asked that question.
Yeah. Not quite, but
yeah.
but you know, their comment is that competition is difficult. They're having a hard time hiring employees in general.
Just finding good people, or what's the
Well,
story?
it's a combination of things. You know, we talk about some different things. We need to make sure our youth have soft skills. They know how to deal with the customer. They know how to be polite and offer services. They know how to run a cash register, and they understand when it's wrong, when the numbers are not quite right. And those are some of the businesses that, you know, they need the kids to be have those skills, and that's part of the problem. So they have to, you know, they talked about the fact that they have to hire them at a minimum wage, and then here they're going to have to increase their wage by state regulation, rather than be able to say, you know, Johnny, you worked for me for 3 months, you have learned all the skills, I appreciate this. And then one gentleman said, I always give a raise after a certain amount of time. I explain to them what I'm expecting of them, and but he said in the rural area, it doesn't make them all that competitive, and most of our bigger businesses have a higher already than a minimum wage. The businesses that I've talked to, well, I see it advertised in the paper quite often. They're offering $10.50 starting wage, and that's not.
They still use the newspaper up there?
Yes, they do. They still use the newspaper.
They haven't gone to the hinterland nets?
Well, and then it is on the internet. It is on the
sure.
internet, and there are some other job opportunities to connect with jobs.
Sure.
But I see big signs outside the businesses. We're hiring. This is what we're paying.
Yeah, right.
And so it quite often you're not seeing that minimum wage, especially for a skilled worker. If they're hiring someone who's skilled and prepared to go, they're getting much more.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. Well, in general, how's the northern economy doing? If there's signs out in their hiring, maybe things have started to turn around a little bit from the Great Recession. Folks in rural, although they weren't so impacted, right?
That's right. That's right.
They were hurt a little, but they weren't really relying on the government in the first place, right?
Well, you know, the blessing is that agriculture did very well. The last 5 years, agriculture's done very well, and we're very reliant on agriculture in my district. And
sugar beet crops
yes,
and all those things.
Sugar beet to, you know, we have different crops, soybeans, corn. We don't have as many sugar beets to the east of my district, but those people have all done very well. And so they've held up the economy, and that's been a good thing for the district. We don't have all that many workers. We have some other issues. We need more people to come up there, but we also have to have housing, and we're having trouble with housing. We need to balance that housing out for middle, low, and upper level people. No, it's just not something we've kept up with a whole lot. So we need to. There's hopefully some bills that will carry through in the Senate that I'm hoping that we'll have some ability to encourage some housing, building of. We need some rural or retiree housing also. We have a lot of retirees, a lot of people that will be retiring in the next few years.
Well, I met some of your mayors up there, and there's a good number of them that align themselves with the DFL, and they always said, you know, if you guys don't figure this LGA thing out, I got one fire truck, and the rest of these guys are volunteers. I can't even run the fire truck now. Can't even put gas in it. What's going on with that? I'm sure you get an earful from the city government types.
Yes.
What do you hear about that? I mean,
well, you know,
do they take you to task for your votes on those things?
Yeah, we've talked about it. LGA is important to especially my small communities. I mean, my larger communities like Crookston and East Grand Forks, it's important to them. But they have some employed firefighters. And of course, a fire in my district, I think we've had 2 or 3 elevators go down in the last few years, which are major fires and require more than just the bigger fire departments.
Guy,
and we have a lot of we really are neighbors. We help each other out when there's a major fire. Other firefighters go. A lot of great volunteers, whether it's the firefighters or the EMTs. They're very good volunteers and are very dedicated and very knowledgeable about putting out a fire and knowing what to do and helping to rescue people. So we don't rely on as much employed firefighters, but we still need the money to keep up our trucks and our equipment. Those things are very important. I think of Little Oslo, which is right outside my district, who has water problems. Their fire agency has a airboat. Because every spring, for about 2 to 3 weeks, they are an island, and so they get people in and out from work with the airboat and the groceries that they need back and forth. So it's kind of interesting, the little different things that we need.
Well, that is definitely interesting. But I was just wondering if LGA cuts have been an issue for you, or if where do you fall on that issue when it comes up? I mean,
I've been supportive. I signed on to the LGA bill that was proposed by the League of Minnesota Cities, Greater Minnesota Cities.
Okay.
And
well, that's
I supported
not in keeping with your party.
No, not necessarily.
They don't like that all the time. Yeah.
No. I had a hard time with the automatic increases. I think we need to be really careful about that.
Sure.
And
let's look at them all every time they come up.
Exactly. You know, and then there is a concern with LGA. We're giving it to the cities in one hand, but we're turning around and charging them water fees and those kinds of things. So are we spending it in the other hand?
Right, are you taking it back?
So, yes.
What about the, what about the Senate's vote to raise pay this year very quietly and tie it to COLA? How did you feel about that? You know, because we don't get a cost of living allowance in the private sector, right?
No.
Your constituents are like, what? Cost of living?
That's exactly right. And the agricultural world,
in there, didn't they?
In the agricultural world, that's not an automatic.
Right,
you can. I've told people I can see an increase. That's great.
Yeah.
I can also see my income cut in half.
Yeah, that's right.
And it can happen really fast. So
and there's no government cheese truck pulling up to the house when that happens, is there?
There isn't.
No,
although I would say farm. Because Minnesota values agriculture and our food supply,
right,
we have some some really nice supports there and helps. Some of my small businesses would say, I'm relying on the weather too, how come you don't help me? And I think it's because we provide food for our citizens, and we, not to be bragging, but we do a really good job in Minnesota. We provide for a lot of people, and
more than just our state.
Exactly, exactly. We're providing for the world, and it's an important job that there should be nobody starving. It's really unfortunate when we see people needing food, because there is no reason for that, and we need to make sure that people have the food they need.
Well, I just thought growing up on a farm as a kid, growing up and being a farmer and knowing how to hunt and all those things makes you pretty self-sufficient, you know. Now, as I've been away from that for 30 years, living in the city, I go and buy some hamburger and think to myself, I just paid the assassin. You know what I mean? But you know, you're pretty, in a farm, you know, you grow up and you're never hungry. I don't remember ever being hungry as a little kid. You know?
No, you take care, and you know, and that's the other thing, on the farm you take care of your animals. You know, my brother has hogs. I've been a fair weather helper once in a while, and they have a real connection to their animals. They want them to be good producers. They take really good care of their sows. They're healthy. They're very, you know, they're very connected with them. Those animals know their voice when they walk in the barn, because I've been told more than once to be quiet and gentle when I first get in there, because
when you get in there,
they're not used to it, and so it's just an experience growing up, and yeah, it's
quite a bit different. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, Representative Kiel, about some of the differences between rural and urban legislators as you've come to know those differences. What do you think some of the significant differences are around the issues? I mean,
well, I think we
more
have
conservative in the rural areas, you think, in general, or what are your thoughts on
I
that?
would say so. I would say, you know, generally more conservative, more close to family, probably a little more closely knit to family, reliant on each other and our neighbors. We really do know everybody who lives around us, generally, and I think, you know, it gets hard in the cities. And I would say, after being a legislator, while I'm fiercely loyal to my rural communities, I understand that the metro area has issues that are maybe parallel to ours, but we have different needs.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to really remember as legislators. You made the comment that you grew up on the farm. I hear legislators all the time say, oh, I grew up on the farm. And I would contend that it's different than when you're consistently on the farm.
Sure.
I mean, I grew up as a child where Dad had no cab. They didn't work very late. I remember my mother always putting hot foods in the, you know, to keep him warm in the fall, so that he had something to warm up on. But there was no heat and radios.
Sure.
In fact, my husband sings still in the tractor because he doesn't have the radio on, because that was what he grew up with. But now we have tractors that drive themselves. In fact, when
GPS,
yes, and when we can finally go into the field, we will be late with wheat. The way it's looking, we'll be late with sugar beets. That would be the next crop we plant.
Right.
I would venture to say that my husband will plant during the day and my son will plant at night. And you can do that with GPS. You can keep the rows straight and are very much more accurate with how we do things than we were at one time, and more efficient in our fuel and those kinds of things too. We're also save quite a bit more than we used to, you know, just because we didn't go over the field as much. So
sure, absolutely. So as farming's become more efficient, I guess the crops, have they benefited from that efficiency, you think, or is it pretty much the same?
I think so. I think so.
Plant the seeds and pray.
Yeah. Well, we do a little bit to help them out, but basically, yes. You know, you're very reliant on our Maker for the provision of rain and sun and all of those things, and we really know that. You know, the importance of how we grow our crops, we're always watching, we're always learning. I know people would say to me, well, you guys don't do anything from November to April, and really in reality we end up having to, you know, we do a lot because of
you gotta do
a lot of bookkeeping now because of government regulations also.
Buying seed, getting ready for the next.
And the farmers spend quite a bit of time in December, January, February, March doing classes, research. They're constantly looking for new ways to be productive. I remember when my husband would put fertilizer down in the entire field, it's just a blanket, where now we look to what is needed for this crop, what is needed in this area. You might not do the whole field anymore. You might not spray weeds in the whole field anymore. You're very prescriptive because you can save costs by doing that.
Excellent. All right, a couple of other issues I want to touch on quickly before I have to let you go. Okay, we've got the Vikings Stadium, Plan B. What's the story with that? Do rural folks care?
They actually did when we voted on it the first time.
Yeah.
I was a little surprised. I heard from a lot of people in my rural areas. It's a big thing for my grocery stores and my liquor stores because there are a lot of family / friend gatherings when the Vikings games come along, and I think it's important. They were concerned we would lose the Vikings. But I would say they're also concerned about the spending, and they would feel that the players / the Viking business should probably pay a little more. I know we're going to, I think the agreement now is we're going to do some memorabilia taxes to help fund this. And I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at how to fund that, but
Well, let's go to Cliff. Any internet questions out there from the Twitterverse?
We had a question about farming and GMOs and the House bill that's been presented, and whether or not you agree with having GMOs be labeled in stores and consumers.
Sure. My concern is about GMOs and labeling. We need to educate the public on what we're really talking about. And I think that that's a real important thing, is to educate the public on GMOs are genetically modified organisms, and how we work on our seeds and help them to be protected, making sure that in some cases seeds are coated so that the bugs don't eat them when they're in the ground waiting to pop open, making sure that they can weather a drought. Those are things that GMO helps us to do, the genetically modified. Should we label that? It becomes a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's a conversation and an education we need to do with people so that we all understand what it is we're talking about.
All right. Yeah, I think that's it for tonight. I appreciate you taking the time out to come talk with us and the viewers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the time too.
All right.
Awesome.
Representative Kiel. And you can find out more about Representative Kiel by visiting the Minnesota Legislative website, and just type in Representative Deborah Kiel, and you'll find her on the website.
I should remind you, it's actually Deb, Rep.
Oh,
Deb.
okay.
God, that will give them some confusion.
Rep Deb, because on the website
it says Deborah?
Yeah, on the Minnesota Legislative
That's why
website,
people get confused.
That's why, so you got to straighten them out too. Absolutely. So. But either way, we'll hopefully they'll find you. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at mncapnews and on Facebook at Minnesota Capitol Conversations. If you send us a good question like we got tonight, we'll ask it on the air as we do every week. For political news and analysis from the Capitol, tune in live every Wednesday morning at 7:40 a.m. to KFAI Radio, 90.3 on the FM dial, where we talk politics for 10 minutes on the radio. We had media production tonight, assistance from Cliff Dahlberg, and our producers, Katherine Loudenslager. I'm Marty Owings, and for my co-host, Andy Friedel and Paul Gardner, who couldn't be with us tonight, so long. We'll see you at the Capitol.